You are now listening to You Heard. In today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by the author, Ly Tran, who recently wrote the memoir House of Sticks and is a Vietnam and Queens native. We dive into all different kinds of topics in regards to trauma, pain, being the light in the darkness, how to proceed with love, forgiveness and understanding, compassion for others versus judgment, and the idea beyond speaking your story as a result of different kinds of consequences, and you feel the importance of sharing that story in order to help others. On today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by Ly Tran, an old friend of mine that I've known from when I lived back in Queens. Ly Tran is the author of the memoir House of Sticks. She is a Vietnam and Queens native who started her journey of forgiveness and understanding through writing her first book. As someone who is painstakingly working to see beauty past her own respective trauma, she continues to figure out how to be the light in the time of darkness. Ly, I'm so excited to have you on You Heard today. I'm really looking forward to diving into all of the amazing points and topics that we're going to be bringing up today. The opening question that I do want to kind of open this episode up with is, what experiences and what about, your life and this journey that you have been embarking in order to give yourself forgiveness and understanding has kind of brought you here today?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on your show today. It's really an honor to be here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
To answer your question, it's, I feel like when I tell people that I've written a memoir, people are like, how are you writing a memoir? You're too young. And, I always think, well, I guess I've lived a very interesting life.
Yeah.
And, it really starts from, coming here from Vietnam through something known as the humanitarian operation, which is a U.S. government program that helped resettle former prisoners of war fighting in the South Vietnamese army here to America. And my father was a POW in the re-education camps for almost 10 years.
Wow.
And so, he fit the bill and he applied and we were accepted. And so that was in 1993 that we immigrated from Vietnam to New York City. And I was only 3 years old at the time. And, we were so poor. We had barely any money, and we had to pay back the government for these plane tickets and figure out how to get food on the table. Nobody spoke English. And, a family friend introduced us to somebody who said, you can make a living making these ties and cummerbunds. And that was basically my first job in America at the age of 3, which is just doing this sort of sweatshop labor at home with my family. Right. And it was a really, in a way, when you're a child, the world is just magical. So
right.
You don't know what anybody else is doing. You don't have anybody else's experiences to compare your own experiences to. And for me, I thought, everybody is doing this. Everybody is going to school and coming home and doing sweatshop labor.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was even called sweatshop labor. I just thought it was work that we had to do to make ends meet and eat. But during this time, what was really hard for us was dealing with my father's PTSD. And he was, quite abusive physically and also emotionally. And I remember when I was 8 years old, I came home with a note from the nurse at school saying, your daughter needs glasses. Please take her to see an eye doctor. And my father just completely lost it. And he ripped up the note and he basically said, if I ever catch you wearing glasses, I'll disown you, because glasses are a government conspiracy and they're designed to take away your eyesight and to make you be reliant on glasses for the rest of your life. And, when you're 8, you think, oh my God, my father must be right. He knows more than me.
Yeah.
He's older. And so I thought, okay, I won't wear glasses.
Yeah.
And, but it was really detrimental to my understanding of the world, because and when I was 8, my eyesight wasn't so bad. So I thought maybe he's right because I can still see the board in school. But as time went on, my eyesight started to plummet and deteriorate. And so I started not being able to see. I had these really terrible headaches and my grades were just, they were terrible.
Yeah.
And instead of understanding that his daughter couldn't see, that she needed glasses, my father basically just said, oh, well, it's probably because you're a girl and you must be, not great at school. You must not be that intelligent. And this is something I sort of, kind of carried with me. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe that's just, maybe everybody is like this. Maybe everybody can't really see the board, but they happen to do well. And it's just me,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had to deal with that all the way up until college, until my brother, because I have 3 older brothers, and my eldest brother came home from college one day and, he gave me a box of contacts because he knew how much I was struggling. And when, seeing the world for the first time, that crisp and clear was just like such an incredible moment. But because of sort of being brainwashed by my father into thinking, if I do this, I'm betraying him somehow, or, I just fell apart and I fell into a really deep depression and I eventually had to drop out of school. So it was during this time that I needed to be self-reflective, and I was so angry with my father for having put me in that position.
Right.
But I realized that I needed to really understand his past, because that anger that I was holding on to for so many years was destroying me from the inside out. I was, and I was suicidal at one point because I couldn't deal with all of those emotions. But to bring it back to compassion and forgiveness, I realized that I needed to forgive myself, to give myself permission to fail.
Yeah.
And say, you know what, you might fail now, but it's not going to be forever. Failure isn't, it's not a forever thing. Right. So after I gave myself permission to fail, that's when I also gave my father permission to fail, because we don't realize that our parents are flawed too.
Right.
Yeah. That human beings in general, all of us, we're all flawed. And so I had to really dig deep into understanding my father's flaws, into understanding his past, the trauma that he went through, in order to forgive him, and then move forward with my life. It came out in the form of writing, at least for me to process all of that forgiveness, all that anger, all these emotions that I had just like roiling within me. I did it through writing, and that eventually became a book, which is now my memoir.
I mean, you set the tone in what we're trying to just dive into here. And a lot of that is so heavy. So my I've only experienced you, kind of like through my old neighbors, and you've always carried yourself as someone who is very well educated and spoken and written and diverse. And I remember my first, adult interaction with you, because obviously I saw you around when I was a lot younger. But was like knowing that you went to Columbia University. And for me, that was like such a big deal. Cause I used to participate in like this, it's called Double Discovery, and it is like a college prep, SAT prep for free for low income students. And, obviously going to a program there, a part of the experience is like whether or not that university is ever really going to be accessible to you in the first place. Like, do you have the resources, like the academic resources, and at that point in time, like you said, you put that pressure on yourself. Like, am I smart enough to get into a Columbia University, when it has a lot more to do with your actual, intellectualism and intelligence? There's a lot of other factors and layers and culture that plays into whether or not that university is going to be accessible to you. And I just remember just being like, wow, like I know someone from Columbia University and like, you were always, just the like smart person in the room. And just like the way that you carried yourself, you were very, I could tell that you were like very independent. You were very go-getting. You were very driven. And I always related to that. That's always the person that I have been. Those are the people that I've always connected myself with. And now that I have gotten older, and have seen past that drive, a lot of the people that I know that were very much like that and that I viewed that way and were similar to myself, a lot of that like drive came from a lot of pain and came from a lot of trauma of like to achieve all these different kinds of things to create a sense of security that wasn't necessarily there when they were younger, or a sense of validation for themselves that they may have not gotten from their parents or their community or their family, of like, I need to hold myself in a very particular way in order for me to take up space. But like at night when you're by yourself and you're in a dark room, you feel extremely small. Though when you're around people, you're the person who takes up the most space. And I know that feeling all too well, and have kind of grappled with that in the past couple of years, especially moving down to Houston and like pretty much disconnecting myself from everything that I know and everybody that I know back at home, in order to like realign that understanding of myself as somebody who always presented themselves in this particular way. And it comes down to like having compassion for myself and compassion for the people who kind of put me in that position. Like you said, like you had to be able to understand where your father was coming from and why he projected what he projected on you. Like I can't even begin to imagine or even try to paint a picture of what that man's life was and what went through his head in order to feel and act the way that he did, and how that translated in you and the way that you interacted with yourself and you loved yourself or didn't love yourself, and how that opens up doors for depression and suicidal thoughts, and because your sense of self is so skewed, and you're like starting in many cases when you fully become like aware of that trauma and how it's like rocked your world, you're starting from scratch, and it's like you have absolutely no tools to figure out how to build this other version of yourself outside of these like ashes, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to really break down what you knew about yourself or how you perceived of yourself. All these walls that you build, all these masks that you put on, you have to take them off. You have to break down those walls. And then what you get, you have to really love what, like the spirit underneath all of that, but that's so hard to do because you're essentially you have to like recondition your mind or uncondition yourself, right? Because you have all these voices in your head. And actually in my memoir is, one of the themes is about finding my voice. And there are all these voices that you get to see in my head. And, the voices come from my father, but they also come from myself. And there are like these 3 or 4 different voices telling me you can't do this.
Right.
Another voice, telling me you can. But that voice is so small. And for so long in my life, I didn't want to listen to that voice because, not that I didn't want to, but I couldn't hear it because all the other voices are so much louder. So when you do begin to forgive yourself, when you do begin to love yourself, that's when that voice gets louder and louder. And you just have to sort of allow it to take up the space, and begin that healing process for yourself. But, it's funny that you talked about, lying alone, like in the dark at night and feeling small. It's something that really resonates with me because I used to, when I was younger, I used to do this thing. I was afraid of the dark, which again is like another theme in my memoir, like this sort of like light and dark and like how to balance that. But I used to go to sleep. I was so scared. And I would start constructing these like crystal domes in my mind. Like I would construct a dome around my body. And it was like a really arduous task that I was undertaking. Like I felt like I had to imagine every like nook and cranny of my body, every angle, every surface, and painstakingly construct this dome so that I could be protected from the monsters in the dark. And I would do this. And then as soon as I was done with myself, I would think about my parents and I would think, oh my God, they're not protected. So I would do it for them, then for my brothers, for my friends, teachers. And eventually I would just, imagine constructing like 1 trillion crystal domes for everybody in this world, every creature, every plant, I just was so scared that this darkness would engulf us all. And I didn't realize until later that was just like almost like a psychological manifestation of what was truly happening in my own life in reality. And I was just really trying to protect myself from trauma. But what's really interesting about what I used to do is that at the end of it all, when I was so exhausted, because I was almost an insomniac, making these domes,
Wow.
I felt like it was something I could control. But at the end, when I was so exhausted, the thing that I did last was I made a dome for the monsters as well. And I think that was sort of my first foray into forgiveness and compassion. Like I didn't, unbeknownst to myself, obviously, it wasn't sort of like a conscious, like, I'm going to forgive these monsters. But it was more like, I just thought about them and I thought, well, maybe they're just as scared as we are, And so I would sort of apply that same reasoning once I connected it to the trauma that I experienced in my life. I applied it to my father, who I almost perceived as a monster,
Right. Yeah.
And so by writing this memoir, I'm essentially making a crystal dome. I'm like creating a dome around him.
Yeah. And like even around your own monsters, I think I'm at this point, I've always been afraid of the dark as well. And it's funny that you bring that up and how it's like these creatures in the darkness and, it's this unknown and your imagination goes to these places of like how you're going to get caught and like just killed or something or attacked. And like you said, like you're trying to protect yourself from this trauma. So even now, I'm almost 30 years old. I'm still very like skeptical and kind of have anxiety about certain things, especially when I'm going to sleep, because I feel like in that state I am in the most vulnerable.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm very big about like making sure our like doors are closed. So like we have next to my side of the bed is the door to the bathroom, and I keep it open a crack, but like closed enough that I'm not able to see into the next room. And it's the same thing from when I go into the bathroom. We have a closet that also has a door, and like that door has to be closed in the middle of the night, because if I get up to go and use the bathroom, I'm obviously half conscious. I don't want to have to worry about what is lurking behind my door, or like what's lurking in my dark closet. And it's clothes, it's baby clothes, it's Pampers, it's my clothes, it's my partner's clothes, like it's and a hamper. Like it's nothing crazy. And I was telling this story to my friend yesterday as we were driving back from a wedding, that I recently had a dream about a couple of family members who have passed away like within my lifetime. And one of them in particular came out of my closet, and I was like,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, exactly. So like my initial like feeling was fear, but when he came out, like he was glowing, and he just looked so at peace and rested and like okay, and he like came and like laid down in the bed with me, and I was just like, hey, like how are you doing? And he was explaining to me that he was exhausted from essentially like transmuting here to like say hello in my dreams. And I was very conscious that like I was in a different space that wasn't like real, because I was able to talk to somebody who has been dead for a couple of years now. And like the way in which he looked and how he was glowing was obviously very different than how I remember physically seeing him like on this plane. And from that experience and that moment, And I remember like after that part of the dream was gone and he left, I was like, okay, nothing else coming out of the closet because this is a little too much for me. And I brought this experience up to another person that I was recording with, who we talked about like spirituality and like working with your ancestors and stuff like that. And I told her that I had some reservations because I'm worried about what I am welcoming into my space when I'm saying that I'm open and I'm willing to be conscious to, you know, my ancestors and the spirits that are around me. And she reminded me like how much control we have in protecting ourselves, especially now as adults.
Right.
And you have the bandwidth to do that. As a child, you look to your parents and the adults to protect you. And I think for me, because my mom is a single mom and my mom was always working, at least from my earliest memory, I remember her always being at work. And the sense of protectedness and security was not something that I had. Given, was I conscious of that as a child? Absolutely not. But the way in which that displayed itself and it manifested as I got older, it now makes sense of some of the like quirks and cues and anxieties that I have because I spent so much of my younger years looking for a sense of security, and protectedness that I didn't feel like I had because like the one person I could rely on, you know, had to give me security in other ways, which was financial security because she was working, but the physical security was lacking. And like being able to understand that like now in this moment, I have the power to actually protect myself. I'm like trying to walk myself through feeling more comfortable with the closet door open and understanding that it isn't this like portal of darkness where all of these like demons and monsters are going to come get me again. Like I just turned 27. So I very much like believe in this stuff that's going to come get me in my sleep and my child and my partner and my dog. And yes. Yeah. So, but it was this just like moment of like, I have the power to reframe the way in which I interact with darkness. And that isn't necessarily darkness. It's like, you know, sometimes you have, and I know that you allude to this like in your book, and in previous interviews that you have done, of being the light in that darkness. Like it is darkness, but when you're able to step into it after all of the like inner work that you've done, you're able to illuminate that space and actually find out like what was in that darkness in the first place. And it ends up not being as scary as you thought it was going to be. And it just needed your attention and maybe some tidying. And again, coming back to that like sense of compassion and forgiving it and like forgiving this space or this person or this part of yourself for being scary for such a long time, but really just needing some TLC. So it isn't like this dark and scary monster anymore.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's really quite lovely that in your dream, what you saw coming out of that darkness was light. Yeah. You know, so in a way, it's like subconsciously you were reframing that for yourself and facing it head on and realizing, oh, you know, from the darkness, like there is light. And it's funny because my mother, when I was younger, every time she dropped me off at, you know, my elementary school, she would always say, okay, Ly, have a good day at school. And remember, and she would say in Vietnamese, gang mực thì đen, gang đen thì sáng. And what that means in English is when you're near the ink, you'll become stained. But when you're near the light, you'll become bright. And so, you know, she would basically, the aphorism was meant to encourage me not to hang out with like bad kids or kids who, you know, are not doing their work. And I remember from such a young age, I would ask her, but Mom, what if I'm the light? And because I thought, wait a minute. So if I hang out with the bad kids, then I'll be stained. If I hang out with the good kids, then I'll be good like them. But what if the reverse were true? Like, what if a bad kid hangs out with me and I'm the light? You know, and it's just fascinating that I was questioning her. And questioning this like age-old aphorism. And, you know, her response was, don't talk back. Just
of course. Yes. And usually it's because I don't have an answer for that, but you know, just go with it, run with it.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's funny. I think I really held on to that for a long time. But the more trauma that I experienced, the more that voice became less audible. So the voice that once asked my mother, "What if I'm the light?" It sort of diminished over time because I didn't, that I felt that darkness encroaching, and I felt like no matter what, I couldn't be the light. I couldn't illuminate my existence and my reality, no matter how hard I tried. But even though the voice became less audible, it never like truly left me. Yeah. And so in my darkest moments, when I was really still and just I guess meditating on my experiences or letting all the hurt wash over me, the one voice that became clear was that voice, reminding me that it is possible for me to still be the light. And so I think it's, this conversation of darkness and light is something that I've been having with myself for a very long time. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to share that with others through this book.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so I know that writing for you, and in particular writing this book and this memoir, it's it's personal, it's raw, and this was a part of your process of finding the light in all that darkness. Do you find yourself still using those tools? Because I know, like, prior to starting the episode, we were talking about how in particular from my own experiences, I have this tendency that I have just, become conscious of, that I have whole parts of my life that I've blocked out and I just don't remember. And how putting yourself in a place to remember and recall as a part of healing, as your process of healing re-traumatizes you. So how have you been able to, unfortunately, and I guess also fortunately, it's a bittersweet experience, re-traumatize yourself to help you understand that you are the light?
Yeah, I think once I was able to really, so what happened in college when I was, so I was accepted to Hunter College in a program known as the Honors College at Hunter.
Yeah.
And that's when I was so depressed. And, my first semester I'd gotten a 4.0. But because I felt like I was betraying my parents by wearing these contacts, I completely just started to fail. And at some point the following year, I just couldn't take it anymore. And that's when I was like sort of at my lowest. I was suicidal. But when I was having these dark thoughts and I heard that voice, that question, like, what if you're the light? I thought, okay, you know what? That's the voice I need to be listening to. That it will be my salvation. And so once I was able to hold on to that, and I was holding on for dear life, literally, holding on to the voice. I think that's when I was able to start the healing process. And, people think healing like is a really nice process and it feels good.
Nope.
It hurts like hell, because you've built up these calluses around your wound. And you have to really kind of like to sort of buff these calluses now and really get to what made the wound to begin with. And essentially you have to open that wound back up, right? And remove whatever debris is in it. And so with regard to the tools, like the tool for me was just belief that I was the light, and belief that my writing could save me somehow. And that's, I allowed myself to fail. And this time, I decided to drop out of college. And that was a very deliberate decision. And it was because I said to myself, okay, your entire life you've been failing, and you've been failing because of not being able to see. You've been failing because you've had to work in a nail salon for so many years. You've been failing because you're poor. You've been failing because you're other, you're an immigrant.
Right.
And for once in my life, I wanted to fail because it was my decision. And oddly, I felt like I empowered myself by doing that, by dropping out of college and saying to myself, listen, this place isn't for you. You're not happy here. and you've been having these dark thoughts. If you continue, this isn't going to look good for you. So you need to take control of your life, and you need to do something about it. And I decided to drop out against like everybody's, advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously if you tell your friends, you tell your loved ones, hey, I'm thinking of dropping out, they're going to say, no, why would you do that? You're so close,
Yeah. Yeah.
But this time I wanted to just listen to myself. I didn't want to listen to anybody else. This time it was me and this little voice telling me that I'm the light and I will figure it out. My path will be illuminated somehow. And so I spent 2 years just kind of floating around, not knowing what to do. And eventually I bumped into somebody. And, during these 2 years, I still, no matter how bad it got, because I had kind of like reclaimed that voice for myself.
Yeah.
I never let it get to me. I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm still lost. I'm still in a way, I'm still blind. But I'm going to continue to believe in myself. And so after 2 years, I bumped into somebody at a clinic, and I told her my story, and she said to me, oh my God, you need to go back to school. And I said, that's like, I would love to, but I dropped out of college with like barely a 2.0 GPA. I mean, it's like awful.
Yeah.
And she said, listen, you have a story to tell. Why don't you apply to these colleges? Why don't you get a job first, so that like colleges will see that you're ready to get back to business.
Yeah.
And then apply to as many colleges as you can and tell them your story. People will understand. And so I said, sure, like whatever. I don't have anything to lose at this point. I'm a college dropout. It's like,
yeah.
And then she said, there's a program at Columbia University called the School of General Studies, and they look at a student's application holistically. They don't actually, yes, grades do matter, but for them, it's more about your past and what got you to where you are today. And they look at your essay, they look at letters of recommendation. Like, it's just weighted differently. Grades are weighted differently.
Right.
And, I basically laughed and I said, you've got to be kidding me. Are you like Columbia University, an Ivy League?
Right.
College?
Out of all colleges.
Yeah. Like, okay. And she said, well, really, what do you have to lose? And I said, you know what? That's an interesting question, because it's true. I had like nothing to lose. And so I humored her. I applied. I told them my story about, being an immigrant and all these things. And yeah, and I applied to like 12 other schools. And it's funny because the School of General Studies at Columbia was the only school to accept me.
That's so
year.
crazy.
Yeah. I got a phone call from the person who interviewed me before my acceptance. She called me up and said, it was on the strength of your essay that we accepted you, because you just have an incredible story. And for me, that was so validating, because for the first time ever in my life, it meant that my story was one that was worth telling.
Yeah.
And it got me through, and here I am today,
Yeah, that's crazy. I never knew that, obviously, since my perception of you is something completely different than the reality. And I mean, if that isn't the truth in most of humanity, then I don't know what is. But I appreciate you sharing your story and giving me the opportunity to know you a lot better, because I've known you for years, but I actually haven't known you like that. Right. So it's awesome to know. And like, if like that's just the universe doing its thing, or whatever you believe in, whether it be gods, the spirit, or just the world being the worlds, like that's amazing. That I think that's so crazy, and it's so telling to what you deserved, because everything that you needed to get to the point that you were at that moment, or even now, was already inside of you. And it had nothing to do with your grades, whether you were a dropout, whether you were working, whether you were an immigrant and working at a nail salon, or doing this or doing that. Like, despite all of these odds, you have so much more to give this world. And there was a moment in time where someone affirmed your belief that you were the light. And I think that's just so beautiful. And in reading some of in reading the material that you gave me for an interview that you had previously, you talked about how every time you told your story, some like terrible consequence or situation would happen.
Right.
And like, if like that would condition anybody to never say anything, especially, you know, I have a lot of friends who are immigrants or children of immigrants, and them telling their story, they very much feel that way. Nobody wants to talk about how they may be here undocumented, or nobody wants to talk about their experience of crossing the river or taking the plane, or what their parents had to do to get to this country.
Right.
Because it's trauma, it's traumatic, it hurts, and it also, you never know who you're talking to who's going to put you in a position that may make you more unsafe because you told your story. And the fact that you were able to put your story out there, and it opened up a door for you, like rather than a consequence, an opportunity came. And like I said, just like further affirmed this magic that you were born with, unconsciously had this. And now it's being celebrated, and, you know, you're so close, to your book launching, and, you know, people can actually purchase your book and engage in it and engage with you. And it's all come around, like all of this work of who you were as a child and everything that you've done is able to be magic. It doesn't have to be pain. And coming back to your intro of like being able to see the beauty beyond trauma and pain. And, you know, I wish that the rest of your life continues like this, because you deserve it. And that's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, though, I also feel so blessed and lucky to have met the people that I've met along the way. You know, that woman, and I'll name her name is Pamela Vandermeulen. You know, I am so eternally grateful to her for all of her encouragement, all of her love, you know, during a time when I really was so lost. And for her to say, hey, you need to go back to school because I believe in you, and you know, this will open up doors for you, and you can do it. It's, you know, just hearing that. And that's sort of what I want to do on a mass scale with my book. I want to tell people, you can do it. I believe in you, because look at my story. Look at where I came from. And it took just, you know, and it wasn't just her. It was my English teacher, Joan Liu, who, you know, Pam reached out to and asked for a letter of recommendation. And so Joan, you know, even after I was accepted to Columbia, I didn't know I knew that I couldn't afford it. And so Joan, or Miss Liu, she reached out to her colleagues and asked them to donate to my cause. And so
that's awesome.
A ton of her colleagues donated. And, you know, this one summer I received a check for $3,000 to pay for part of my first semester at Columbia. And so just all these people in my life, you know, I remain so grateful to them. So there's so many factors. There's the belief in yourself, there's forgiveness, and then there's also sort of these external factors and but I feel like those come when you are able to take control of your own life. And you're like telling the universe, I'm ready, you know, and these angels just appear. Yeah. You made yourself open for that. And I don't know, I feel like it was such a beautiful story. I have no other words to add to that. There just isn't, I can't think of anything else to say, because exactly what you said, like you taking control, from the moment that you decided, like, I'm going to make this failure on me. Like that's such a huge thing, especially for a woman, an immigrant, someone who grew up poor, taking that risk of saying, no, I'm going to fail on me. Like, I'm not, society has failed me enough, and I have busted my butt to get where I am, but like, I'm going to take this L. I chose this L. I have control over this L. And how that empowered you to further understand that you did have control over your life, and that, you know, you chased the voice that said you could, that said that you were the light. And then someone gave you the opportunity to further affirm that. And you're like, you know what? I am. And you got it. And like, shit. I know. Like, I wonder sometimes, I'm like, okay, I hope doesn't come off as like arrogant or something. No, it's like, no, not at all. Light is within everyone. You know? Absolutely. Basically my point. Yeah, no, I mean, I hope anybody who's listening to this understands that that's the point that you are trying to make. Like, we're born with this light. And despite
anything and everything and the cards that you were dealt or the cards that you didn't even get to have at, you know, your game table or however we want to put it and make it a visual. But, you know, you're born with it. And if you hear that voice and you further validate and affirm the power and stand in the power that you have, things will come. It's the law of attraction. Like, you know, if we don't want to just think about like the spirituality aspect of it, if you believe in science, the law of attraction is an actual thing. And, or like energy could be neither created nor destroyed. So like the energy that is within you existed before you is going to exist after you. You might as well use it. And use it to your advantage to have a full and abundant life, because that's what you were born to have. Like that is your purpose. I think people spend so much time trying to, and I know that I have been that person, and I have my moments where I continue to be that person, where you're constantly in this position where you feel like you're trying to find your purpose, you're trying to find your calling. Well, what am I called to do? What am I? You're called to live. Like your purpose is to like live the fullest life that you possibly can. And in that, as we mentioned before, things will radiate beyond you. And that is your gift to the world. If you're looking for your purpose of what you're supposed to embark, you know, in this lifetime and what you're supposed to give to others in this lifetime, it's allowing yourself to stand in your power, to live your fullest you. And whatever comes out of that is your legacy.
I mean, it's something that I feel like it's so, I mean, just life is just like one big roller coaster, you know, but to have something to hold on to, that comes from within, I think it's so valuable, you know, because no matter what, you and only you are walking this path, you know, so you only have yourself. And so if you're able to, you know, especially for those listening, I feel like if you're able to really tap into that inner strength and hold on to it, like so many doors open as a result of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, again, like grateful that I was able to have the tools, whether I found them myself or people have helped me along the way. But I'm just so grateful to have come to that conclusion and be able to share it with others.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming to the end of the episode, and I first want to say how grateful and thankful I am that I had the opportunity to get to know you a lot better. And it's just been a beautiful experience, and I'm super honored that you took the time out of your day with everything else that is going on in your life and all of these amazing things that are happening to just say, hey, I'm going to be on this podcast and I'm going to talk to this community and, you know, again, be the light, and, you know, hopefully somebody is able to get something from this. But I wanted to thank you and also give you the opportunity to kind of leave the audience with something, whether it be an affirmation, a piece of advice for anyone who's listening. What do you want them to walk away from when it comes to your episode today? You
know, it's funny. People, you know, people have asked me in the past, like, what advice do you have? And I'm like, do I have any advice?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't, that's okay.
Yeah. There is light. There's always light. And for those who are going through a tough time, for those who are hopeless or feel like there is no hope left, I'm just here to say that although I don't understand, or I might not be able to understand what it is that you're going through, if you can listen to my story and find that it resonates with you, I just hope that you understand that you have the same tools that I have, you know, that you can be the light as well, and that you are the light, rather. And hold on to that.
You are now listening to You Heard.